Hey, what's up? I'm Paik. I'm one of the mechanics at BAKCOU, and today we're going to go over how to service your brakes. We're going to go over 3 sections. We're going to go over how to adjust them, we're going to go over how to change pads, and then we're going to go over how to bleed brakes. During that, we're going to go over some common issues and how to diagnose them. Just a reminder, everything on the front is the exact same on the back with the Timberwolves. So as far as pads and adjustments, it's the exact same. The first thing we're going to go over is how to adjust some brakes. So you can't hear any rubbing. And it also kind of cover over our first common issue, and that's these front brakes are pretty loose right here, and so we're going to go over how to adjust that. I'm going to go over the components of the brakes, so that way when I say them, you guys know what I'm talking about. This is the brake rotor. This is the caliper. Inside the caliper are the pads. This is the brake line, and this is the brake lever. Now I'm going to show you what it looks like when your brakes need adjusting. You either hear a sound or you'll see your rotor move like this. A lot of times that'll make your brakes super soft, and that means you need an adjustment. To loosen the brake caliper, you're going to use a 5mm hex. I like to use a socket. Any type of hex tool will work. You're just going to loosen the top and the bottom, and then slide the caliper until you can see some sunlight on both sides of the rotor. This is a brake pad. It has metal underneath, and then the brake pad is on top. You'll know it's time to change when your brake pad is all the way down by the metal. This pad is still in good shape, doesn't need to be changed. I'm going to show you now how to replace and remove your brake pads. There's quite a few steps, so I'm going to show you some close-ups, so follow along with me. You're going to take your 5mm hex, and you're going to loosen these bolts all the way out to remove your caliper. You want to make sure to pay attention to how those bolts came on. These each had a washer spacer between them, so you want to make sure it goes back on the way it came off. Next, you're going to take your 3mm, you're going to remove this bolt that holds the pads and the bracket in place. Now that you got this bolt out, it's time to get your old pads out. Before you do that, you want to grab a screwdriver and push those pistons in the caliper back out. You want to do that because then it'll give room for those new pads to go in there, and they'll be able to go around that rotor. So now I like to grab these with a pair of needle nose. Sometimes it helps if you push from the top, pinch them down with the needle nose, pull them out. If all possible, save this bracket because it'll match the pads. If it's in good shape, you're good to save it. Your old pads, you can just chuck. Now that you got some new pads that match your old ones, you want to be careful not to touch the actual brake pad part because any oil will compromise the pad. So just do your best to keep your fingers on the back side. And if you're too worried about it, you can put a latex glove on. You want to slide the bracket on either side of that pad. Make sure that that bracket is holding tension on them. Grab your caliper again and just slide them back in where they came from. Line up your top hole. Reinsert your bolt. Tighten it down. Check and make sure your pads are still in that bracket and that they look even. And then you're good to go back on to your mounting bracket. Now that you got your new pads in place, you want to tighten these down, get them close, and then adjust them like we talked about before. Now that your pads are new, you may not have as much room as you did before, but don't be worried, your pads will wear over time. And remember, you want to be able to see some light on both sides of your pad. You want your rotor right in the middle of your pads. We're going to do the rear because that's the most common one that needs to be bled. If you're wanting to bleed your front brakes, the same steps apply as the rear. Everything that you use to take your pads off, you're going to need again. So I recommend needle nose, the 3mm, 5mm, both of those are hex keys, screwdriver, flathead screwdriver. Now for bleeding specific, you're going to need, for our tektro brakes, you need a 15 millimeter Torx. For the reservoir, you're going to need mineral oil for tektro brakes. We use this finish line oil, but any mineral oil is good. Do not use DOT or car oil. That will ruin the brake lines. And then you're going to need a bleeding kit with 2 syringes, adapters, and then piston stoppers. Those just go in place of your pads. We're bleeding the rears, so you want to make sure you're on your right lever. You're going to start by taking this T15 out. Make sure that the gasket comes with that screw. Then you want to grab your syringe with the matching adapter, screw it into where that screw was. And you want to make sure this is closed. Closing that's going to hold all the fluid in the line while you put your syringe in the rear, in the caliper. So now let's move to the caliper. Same idea. You want to take out that screw right there. It's a T15, just like up on the lever. This one you want to be decently quick with, just because there can be some leaks. Okay, so now that you got that threaded in, you want to grab your pad replacer, stick it in the place of your pistons so they can't go anywhere. Now you got to come back up to the top, open that up. Now you're ready to start bleeding. Come back to the rear, start pressing. Your fluid will go in. We're actually changing fluid, so we're going to see a color change here. So now I'm seeing green, and I'm seeing no air bubbles coming out of right here. So these brakes are bled. You want to go through and shut that again. Then you want to come back down to your rear and do the same steps again. Once again, you want to try to hold this straight up and be as quick as possible. Tighten that down, clean up your mess, and then go back up to the top. Okay, so now they're bled. So now you want to go through, put your pads back on, put the caliper back on the rotor, and squeeze them. Make sure that you have enough fluid in there. As you guys probably saw, I lost a little bit of fluid on both ends, so we might need to add a little bit at the end. If they're still soft and you want them a little bit firmer, just like the first step in bleeding, you can grab your T15, you can unscrew that cap, and then take your syringe with your clean oil in it, and just drip some in there until it fills that reservoir and put your cap back on. More times than not, that's plenty, and it'll get those brakes to be pretty stiff. You just want to be careful doing that you don't put too much in there to where your brakes have no play in them at all. We did an adjustment to fix rubbing noise or a loose handle, and that's how to adjust your caliper. Next, if you have a squishy brakes, we went over how to change your brake pads and how to tell if those are low and need to be changed. And lastly, we went over if your brakes are squishy and you've done those steps and you need a last resort, we went over how to bleed your brakes. And that's basically how to service your brakes and keep them firm. One thing I would like to mention is we use Squill Out. It's pretty hard to find nowadays, but it's a paste that resurfaces your rotor. There's other pastes like that out there, and that's really good for taking noise away on your brakes. If they sound like a horn or if they're really whiny, this is a good thing to take them away. And if you have any questions or you're doing this and you're running into problems, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to help and walk you through any steps.